In-game decisions, let's talk about it. Because there was recently a couple interviews given and questions asked of players that made me realize how a lot of the in-game decisions might change most drastically this year, more so than any year in recent history. Though we do know a lot of rule changes happen all the time in baseball, especially Major League Baseball, especially in recent years. But like a lot of the in-game decision-making kind of lags behind that. Like how do we make decisions based on these rule changes? And today, in-game decision-making is going to be focused a lot around how the catchers make decisions, often called the quarterback of the baseball team. The catcher is the one that gives the signs about bunt plays, it gives the signs about situational stuff, and also manages the pitcher and works with the pitcher on the game plan for facing other hitters. So not only do they have to be ready to play defense at a very high level, they also have to understand how the pitcher is going to get hitters out. And they also have to hit, right? So there's a lot on their plate. And the two stories that in question are going to relate to that. Let's start with the first conversation that was had was with starting pitcher Chris Sale of the Atlanta Braves about the brand new automated balls and strikes challenge system, or the ABS for short. It is going to be live this year, guaranteed. It's happening. We saw it tested in spring training last year. It is going to be live in games this year. There will be only a handful, I believe it's 3 challenges per team. And if you are right, and by tapping your helmet, the hitter can do it, and the catcher can do it, and the pitcher can do it. If any one of those 3 guys challenges it, then it's wherever the call, ball or strike, is going to flip towards whatever one is advantageous to the hitter. So like no hitter's going to be like, that's a strike, nah, that's a ball, nah, that's a strike. Like they're not going to ask for a strike, they're going to ask for a ball. So anyone can do it. You have a finite number. If you get it right, you can retain that challenge. If you get it wrong, you lose it. Very similar to instant replays and things of that nature. So they're going along those lines. So Chris Sale was asked, would he ever use it? Well, he says he won't. Now remember, the things that are so interesting about this are guys like Chris Sale, who is a longtime veteran, arguably a Hall of Fame pitcher, right? He's going to be asked, are you going to use this? Can you use this to your advantage? We saw Max Scherzer, when they came out with the pitch clock, trying to find ways to make the pitch clock work to his advantage. So it bodes to reason that you would ask Chris Sale, do you feel confident that you'll be able to use this challenge system to benefit yourself as a pitcher? The interesting questions we've had about the ABS is who is going to be allowed to basically have autonomy just to do it whenever they want, and who isn't? And then how is each team's strategy going to differ? Because now there is strategy around the ABS. How is each team going to make decisions about how these things are used? And is it going to become a priority to end the game without any challenges? Just so you leave all stones unturned. Are we going to see a bunch of like unused challenges used at the end of the game just to see if you can steal a strike here or there or whatever? Similarly to how you try to use your challenges, try to use them. If there's anything questionable, you try to use them at the end of the game no matter what. It makes sense. Is that what's going to happen? So those are the questions around it. And Mr. Sale, I think, gave us some interesting insight into how these things might be used, especially for a guy of his caliber, a guy who you would assume has an automated green light to do whatever he wants, right? So here's a quote from him. From the article of MLB.com, he said, quote, "I'm not an umpire. That's their job," Sale said. "I'm the starting pitcher. I have never called balls and strikes in my life." Now, at first glance, you look at that quote, you're like, okay, is this Sale has had in his past no qualms with being vocal about things he didn't like. And it sounds like that might be something he is saying, but as he continues, you realize very quickly that he's not just saying, oh, the ABS is stupid, why can't we just use the umpires like we always have? What he's trying to say is he is very confident out there. So later he says, no, it's not because I don't like it, it's because I am confident almost to a fault when I'm pitching, and I'm also very emotional. And I think I'll get greedy, and what I'll do is I'll think everything is a strike, and I might take away challenges that we need as a group just because of my own ego. And he knows that about himself. And he's a starting pitcher, so he's going to be pitching in the front part of the game. You might need challenges more at the end, okay? He also said something that resonated a lot with me, because I experienced the same thing in 21 and 22 playing with the Mets. I got what was called Tomas Nido'd a lot. Tomas Nido is a good friend of mine and also a phenomenal receiver or a framer of pitches. He was not only fooling the umpire, he was fooling me a lot. So like I would get riled up. I'd get mad at the guy behind the plate. I'd be like, where's that? Whatever. And in reality, Nino's just like pulling the wool over my eyes and something 6 inches outside of the plate. Looks like a strike, and I'm mad about it. Sale says, these guys behind Murph and Baldwin, they're both very good at receiving, and they get me a lot. So now I don't even trust my own eyes as it stands. I don't want to waste any challenges. I am going to put that power in the hands of the catcher because they are the ones that both see the pitch the best, they're following along with the flow of the game the best, and they know the umpire the best. And they know what this umpire has, like what spots they might struggle to see and where you're more likely to, most likely a spot that they're most likely to get it wrong. So maybe they're more confident in calling their challenges. So he said, I'm going to defer to the catcher, which is exactly what I would have done as well. And I think that a lot of veteran guys are going to do because that catcher-pitcher relationship is supposed to be ironclad as it is. And that's just another thing that you would rely on them to do. So I'm very interested to see how this plays out in real time. Now, our second story continues to kind of talk about the role that a catcher is going to play in making on-field decisions, because if we're giving them ABS responsibilities on top of pitch clock and on top of knowing the scouting report and on top of having to know all the bump plays and on top of having to know how they're going to be pitched when they're trying to hit, that seems like a lot, especially when there's now a timer going every single time where shaking can't happen. You can't really figure things out in real time. You have to have this stuff really, really ironed out before the game starts. There's a lot for catchers to have to worry about. So the second story that came out recently was, we talk about him a lot. It's actually crazy how much we talked about this gentleman, Tony Vitello, the new manager for the San Francisco Giants in 6 days of spring training, but here we are once again. It has been mentioned that he might be open to calling pitches from the dugout in Major League Baseball. Now, if you don't remember, Tony Vitello is the first ever manager to come directly from collegiate baseball as a manager to the manager role. The first ever coach to do it was pitching coach Wes Johnson, my pitching coach with the Twins in 2019. I recently got to talk to him about it too. That video is coming out on my YouTube channel tomorrow. You should check it out, or you could go over to the Substack and watch it right now if you want. But it is a very interesting, I think, situation happening where one of our main stories that we talked about last week was, what's this guy gonna do and how is he gonna change the way that the Giants operate moving forward, especially with a guy like Buster Posey, who is a pretty old school dude, who is a very likely going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer as his president of baseball operations. But when asked, he talked about how much he called pitches for his pitchers in college, 85% of the time, but the catcher over time was able to kind of take over a lot of the stuff. You earn the opportunity to do it. Now, there's a lot going on here. We talked about it last year as well. The Marlins tested it for 9 games, the last 9 games of the season last year, calling a lot of the pitches from the dugout, especially with a rookie catcher behind the plate and so a lot of rookie pitchers on the mound. This is a way to help them learn. It's a different beast up in the major leagues. The amount of information is different. The way that you're approaching hitters is different. Like learning that on the fly, you either have to commit to just being not very good at it a while and just kind of throwing them in the deep end and watching them try to learn to swim. That's what happened to me. Or you can help guide that situation. There's a lot of nuance here. In this article, talked to a lot of different people, a lot of different managers with different takes on it. And we're going to get into it in just a second. But to harken back to the Sale conversation, we are going to see a very interesting funneling of decisions to the catcher, both from the dugout and possibly from the pitcher, because of the new systems put in play and the new way of approaching making good pitch decisions throughout a game. This is really interesting to me. Here's what Vitello said in a quote from Andrew Baggerly's article in The Athletic, this article that we see here. It says, there's a lot of guys that were not happy with last year, how it went. Vitello said, this is a mutually exclusive year, but the past does have an influence. And I think some of these guys are using last year's frustration, whether they are in the minor leagues or at the big league level, as motivation to be better prepared and be a little hungrier this year. I think there's an openness to trying new things. That's an interesting way to phrase it. I think that what he is trying to hedge here is these guys are big leaguers. They have earned the right to make their own decisions, and it's kind of part of the game is knowing how to do your job really, really well. Taking that out of your hands feels a little bit like you're not being treated like an adult. And so he knows that's not going to be popular right away, and it needs to be something he's into. So well played, very political answer there. But let's continue with the quote. I don't think it's going to be a hard line rule. Vitello continued. Patrick Bailey is who he is, and the flow of the game is crucial. It'll be case by case, and it's something that will roll through in spring training. But if we're going to put me on the spot, I'd say occasionally, yeah, we'll do it. So, in no uncertain terms, Tony Vitello has said that he will call some number of pitches from him or the pitching coach or the assistant pitching coach or someone who's designated to do it. Very interesting, which raises a whole bunch of questions for me. Like, is shaking allowed? Is it going to be similar to ABS? Are we going to give certain guys the green light to shake whenever? Are we going to have certain situations or certain buckets of situations where you shouldn't shake and we need to be on the same page here? When are we going to defer just to the pitcher and catcher relationship? When are these things going to happen? And so there's a lot of arguments made for and against maybe the downsides or maybe the upsides of doing this in the major leagues. And these conclusions were come to by talking to a lot of the managers around the league about this specific thing. So let's talk a little bit about the arguments for, okay? Here's 6 reasons why this could be a good thing, at least in terms of performance on the field, okay? The dugout has a superior data access for optimizing the pitch selection. Basically, you come up with your game plan, then the dugout can actually reference the game plan in real time. Like, you can't do that out there. Pitchers, they have their little cards, but like, you're trying to remember stuff. If you can help with that, or at least put the bumpers on and be like, hey, remember, this is what we talked about. You can find a way to communicate to the catcher. I think that's an aggregate positive. It frees the young bat-first catchers to focus on hitting mostly, not to worry so much about catching. Don't like that. Catching is part of your job. Most of the time, it's the biggest part of your job. And I think that's dangerous if you say, hey, we're putting pressure on to improve in a certain game part of your game you do. Like, I think we've gotten so optimized in what guys do well that sometimes we pigeonhole them into getting better. Like, guys who aren't great defensively can become very good defensively, but if we never put any sort of stakes on them getting better at catching, they're not going to. It's just human nature. And so if we do that when they're young, they may never develop into the player they could have been because they just thought they didn't have to. We don't need to specialize as soon as they get to the big leagues. I don't really agree with that one. Number 3, catchers are already cognitively overloaded with recent rule changes. I agree with this one. The speed. Pitch clock makes it so you can only shake so many times. If you're trying to remember things and then push the right buttons and you're young and you don't really know the guy and whatever, we can help with that at the beginning until you get into the flow of things. I totally understand that. I would have appreciated that, I think, a little bit in my last year with the A's in the first year of the pitch clock. It keeps defensively limited catching prospects viable. Again, you got to be able to catch. I don't know. Like, I think alleviating the range of your ability to catch the ball and be a good catcher, like, I just think the elite guys show a propensity to do all the things well, and saying, hey, you don't have to be elite stunts a guy's opportunity. I like the idea that any player can come up and develop into something amazing if they find things that click. But if they just say, okay, I don't have to do that, or I don't have to do that, and this is my very narrow lane, then what happens when the team that has them only in that narrow lane, you need to go somewhere else, they don't know how to do the other stuff? It hurts that person's career. That's something I'm never probably going to fully get behind. Number 5, struggling franchises have little to lose by experimenting. Sure, great. It's about making better decisions. If this helps you make better decisions to win games, sure. But if it stunts the growth of your players, then that could end up being a negative than a positive. So that's a balance. We're going to have to figure out which one is better. And then 6, players raised in the system already, the trend may be inevitable. So like guys who've just had their pitches called all the way through, guys who are in college, but pitches called all the way through, and then they get to the big leagues in 6 months because they're really good. Maybe it's an easier way to transition them in without having to culture shock them. Like, you're in the big leagues and you have to figure out how to call a game. It can transition them in better. I agree with that. But like, those aren't the strongest pros, in my opinion. They're not. 2 of them are kind of the same. But then there's cons, as there always are. And here's some of the arguments against. Catchers read swings, body language, and pitcher feel in real time. The dugout can't. Yes. The catcher knows what pitch is working, not moving the same way, or whether or not that pitcher is confident in it better than the dugout will. They just will. They're supposed to be best friends. So you could be like, just keep throwing the slider. And the guy could be like, I don't have a slider today. That could become an issue really quickly, especially if it's being dictated and it's not a two-way street. It needs to be a two-way street. The batter relationship involves managing emotions and rhythm, not just data. Yes, there are intangibles, there is a connection, there is trust. And if something is happening where the pitcher isn't fully understanding where the information from the catcher is coming from, if there's a disconnect that happens in mid-game, there's a very few ways to fix that in the middle of an inning. You have to be tight going into a game. Tight. Everyone has to know what's going to happen. And if there's any confusion, fixing that confusion with all the new rule changes is going to be next to impossible. Number 3, the optimal pitch is useless if the pitcher can't execute at the moment. Again, the feel. We got to know if they're executing or not. Only the catcher really knows how well it's being executed, and the pitcher. They need to be able to be like, this isn't working, let's fix it from pitch to pitch, and they need the trust of the dugout to do that. So it remains to be seen if that would be something that would happen. I feel like this could become an issue. It's one of those things that too many cooks in the kitchen could become a problem very quickly. 3, the pitch clock makes dugout to mound communication impractical. That's true. That stinks. The pitch clock just makes it so you can't talk to them. You have to. It always has to go through the catcher anyway. So what are we really taking from the catcher if they're just a middleman now? Like, that might make things more confusing. Minor league implementation creates catchers who never learn to call games. Yes, if they're doing this in the minors, when are they going to learn to do it? Right? Like, if we do it all the way through the minors, because if it happens in the big leagues, if you're not doing it in the minors, then you just do it in the big leagues. That's weird. So, like, you don't want to have to go back and forth. You want it to be the same all the way through. So if they're doing that in the minors, at what point exactly are they going to learn to call their own games? If that's what you want. And then if you get a guy who never learns to flex that muscle, and then he goes to another organization that doesn't call the pitches, that person is going to have a steep learning curve, and it could hurt their career. And then the last thing, elite game callers are a competitive edge that you'd be voluntarily surrendering. Yes, some catchers are just better at it than others, and it's a skill gap thing. If we're just like making all the catchers generic, and then now it's about your talent in your dugout, not your talent on the field, that feels a little bit not great either. And the players are supposed to be able to have a lot of ways to separate themselves and make themselves valuable. And if we just start shaving those things off and taking them away from them, like, we already have ABS, framing's gonna start going away. So now they don't get a frame and they don't get a pitch call. If they don't hit, then what's the point? They're just basically a backstop. So that's the danger. And I agree with all those things. And this is really interesting. So, like, I think it's just situational. I think it comes down to, what is the situation, and is the goal to eventually not have to do this because we're on such a good on the same page? If that's the case, at the end of the day, you still have veto powers at all times as a pitcher. And then you can be wrong, but at least you know that 2 people agree as opposed to him just kind of coming up with it. If you trust it, you're more likely to trust the pitch you're throwing. That might be a net positive, but eventually at the end of the day, you have to be confident in your own decision, or you're just not going to be a good pitcher. It's just at the end of the day, you can't just be dictated to all the time. So how does it play out? What's the situation? That matters a lot, and that comes up when you look at who is for and who against. So here's a few guys. Here's how it kind of buckets, okay? To it, like Tony Vitello, Buster Posey. Basically, everyone in the Marlins organization, Alan Leakman, who was the guy with the Marlins who did the pitch calling, he's now with the Rockies, he's open to it. Patrick Bailey, everyone says it's surprising that he was like, oh, whatever wins this games, but that's just what players say, right? I'm sure he's like, hey, man, I believe I'm really good at this, and I believe that someday it will be my job, but, like, I'm not going to rock the boat here and be like, nah, I want to do it because I don't want to do that. But then there's traditionalists. There's other managers like, I don't think we need to do that, and that's like Stephen Vogt. What was he? He was a catcher. Stephen Vogt with the Guardians, but again, he's got Hedges, and he's got Bo Naylor. He trusts the heck out of those guys. That's the point. They built that trust on purpose. They're already there. They don't need to implement something like this because they think they make good decisions. Skip Schumacher, Matt Quattraro, or Quattro as I call him, and Dan Wilson, also an ex-catcher. But Matt Quattraro has who? Salvi Perez, right? Skip Schumacher. He had Jonah Heim, or would have had Jonah Heim, but, like, it really depends on who's back there. But it comes down to, like, also, who are your pitchers? Jacob deGrom, Nate Eovaldi. You're not telling them what to throw. They're going to shake anyways, so what's the point of you dictating it? But it turns out that the people who are against it usually have pretty good situations going on. But the people who are like, it's nuanced, situational, is like Buster Posey, like Torey Lovullo, Terry Francona. They're open to it. If they needed to do it, they would do it. If we need to put a young guy in a situation to learn, but us still be relatively successful at the beginning, then we'll do it. It makes sense to do it. That is the situation where it makes sense. But if not, we got to be really careful about how we do this. This cannot be, once again, this cannot be a manager dictating what is happening on the field. But you'd be crazy to not be open to some sort of system that helps you at least participate in that process or remind the battery that you have out there what we talked about before the game started. If you're able to do that, I think it is net positive because you can avoid that, like, push the young guys, 2 of them, out into the deep end and watch them flounder for 6 months and have your team and just suck, right? And then maybe never figure it out. I think there's a middle ground there, but we'll have to see. We'll have to see, because I think it depends on who is making the decision. Is it a group effort in the dugout, or is it one guy? Is it like the game plan that you all came up together, so you guys are already on the same page, and you're just there to remind them of the plan, and then if they want, they're like, hey, we see something, we're making an adjustment, and they can make that conversation, and the dugout's like, all right, hands off, or we're gonna bring hands on the wheel, we're gonna help you out. It's a, do you need us or do you not need us situation? If that's the way it's operated, I think that could work in very specific situations to help young guys be successful quickly so that they can get in the process, they can get going, and then that team can not go through those growing pains, because I experienced these growing pains. I had no idea what I was doing. And I was kind of guess and check. And that felt a little bit lonely, like you're on an island, but again, you can take, not everyone is so good at like asking questions and like being really comfortable right away. If that's what you need, if you need to put the training wheels on, but those training wheels are gonna come off someday, I don't see any reason why you can't try this. So I'm all about innovation, but I am concerned. If they're doing it in the minors, when are they ever gonna learn to not do it? Is that the long-term goal? Is this a means to an end? Or is it a mechanic that we can employ in certain situations? That has remained to be seen. It's gonna be interesting because I bet you the Giants and the Marlins are not the only 2 teams that are gonna try it this year. Don't be surprised if we see the Rockies do it, because they struggle to prevent runs. They need a lot of help, but it's fascinating, especially when it comes to the ABS. So who gets to make the decisions? Are the ABS decisions also gonna come from the dugout when a young guy's pitching? Is that gonna be tied in or not? Or are we gonna just do the sale system and just say, catchers, you got this, but we're gonna help you with the game planning so that you can take over the challenges. It's gonna be really cool to see it play out, because it's these new mechanics that are going to be a new way to play the game. And it's an interesting, like, subtle strategy situation, holding on to these things when you make decisions, when you don't. I think it'll be really fun, and it'll take us back to, people maybe aren't seeing it this way, the same way as me, but it might take us back, full circle, back to a little bit more of a traditional feel, as these little decisions can affect the big game, and they're kind of going on behind the scenes, but they may bring just a couple more wins to a team, and that can be the difference between the playoffs and missing them. So if we're out here to guide the game and not dictate, I think it's totally worth exploring, but it's also just as likely that it go the way of the opener and be a failed experiment, because the opener is indeed a stupid failed experiment. Thank God we're done with that.